Okay, guys, here's the thing. I've been having a coughing thing. I just cough for no reason, and once I start, it's hard to stop. And so this might happen in today's show. I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to be able to mute it out. I'm going to try to write my mute buttons, but I will fail. But you didn't tune in to hear about any of that. You don't care. You don't give a damn about my throat. And so, without any further ado, hello, hello, and welcome to yet another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic, and I'm joined by.
And he's joined by David Russell, his Christian co-host, along with Travis, the other Christian, and this ragtag group we got below me. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Don't all go at once.
I think
Brian with a
mics are
P.
muted.
Yeah.
All
Brian.
right. So
Yeah.
Brian
Good.
is actually going to be manning the chat room. He is the official chat room moderator today until he decides to walk off and leave things unattended. Anyone who is in the chat room who might have something to say, I think there's a hand raise feature. We'll be glad to bring you in. I might have to step out of the podcast every now and then to, take care of a fit. But besides that, let's see if we can't move forward. We are in the series, A Time to Kill. And Russell and I started it off by talking about killing with a kind of a general philosophical overview. That was a pretty good show. You should go back and listen to it. It's on Skeptics and Seekers .squarespace.com, and when you see the show A Time to Kill, that page will have all of the shows that we're doing, and so that was a pretty good one. The second show we did last week was on abortion. That was a terrible show. That was a dumpster fire of a show. You should listen to that one too. But it was a train wreck, and so you should listen to it in the same way that you watch a train wreck. You just can't tear yourself away from it. It was exactly what you should expect from a panel full of type A-hole personalities on a topic that we all care about. And so I'm fine with that. Great. We had Clinton Wilcox guest starring as the Christian show host. It was his first time on Skeptics and Seekers. I hope that it is not his last time on Skeptics and Seekers, because we all really agree. We liked him a lot, and I wish he could have been there for more of the show. He had to leave partway through. This week, we are dealing with the subjects of war and self-defense. So, as you already know, there are lots of faces of killing. And we're going to deal with 6 of them before this series is over. So we dealt with abortion this week, war and self-defense. Tomorrow, we'll actually be doing another show featuring Matt and whoever else wants to come along, and we'll be talking about the death penalty. I'm kind of looking forward to that one. Next week, we will be doing euthanasia and suicide, and I'm sure that we'll have some guests there, but I plan to get into the ring on that one because I care a lot about that issue. And so if you want to hear me do more talking next week, euthanasia and suicide, I will be featuring myself in that show, and whoever wants to take on that conversation. That's going to be a difficult, serious, sad at times conversation, I'm sure. We all have stories. And then we'll finally close it out with Brian with a Y and myself, as we often do with these series, and we'll do a finale and see if we can pull all of these threads together and make sense of it. And so, without any further ado, let's set the table for war and self-defense. I'm going to go ahead and start with a brief opening statement, and I will turn it over to Russell to follow if he likes, and our guest Travis And then I believe that Andrew will be here for a little bit. We'll let him round out the opening statements. Please be brief. By brief, I mean take the length of my opening statement and cut it into thirds. And that's the length of time that the opening statement should be. I'm just long-winded. So here we go. I actually feel much the same about this subject, war and self-defense, as I felt about last week's subject, abortion. It's something that I dislike. I find distasteful. And yet I have to acknowledge that sometimes we just don't have a choice. And that's what we have to do. War is one of those things where only a psychopath would say, "Oh, yeah, that's a good thing," in my opinion. It's not good for anybody. It's awful. It's a terrible thing to come to. But I do believe that it has to be done. Self-defense. And when I talk about self-defense, I am largely talking about using lethal force. Okay, I'm not talking about running from a situation. Okay, that's a type of self-defense, but I'm talking about the kind of self-defense that requires you to put down another human being. It's a terrible thing. I've never had to do it, but I'm physically prepared to do it if I had to. And I think that that would disturb my sleep for a while. It would change my humanity a bit if I had to, but I would do it. I don't think I would hesitate to do it if the time came, especially if what I was defending was my wife. I think I would have to do it. Now, it's terrible, but sometimes it's necessary. What I have a little bit more trouble with is understanding the Christian view, just philosophically and on a lot of levels. I was a Christian for most of my life, a preacher for most of that time. And with my understanding of the God of the Bible, in his idea of war, his war doctrines, his behaviors that he both tolerated and ordered, I can tell you now that whatever my foundational beliefs are that bring me to my opinion on these subjects, it's not based on that anymore. And I don't understand how anyone could base their understanding, their ideas about war and self-defense and just throwing in the death penalty and claim that they're getting it from the Christian God, because the Christian God is a war criminal, is a monster. And I can't imagine that any part of a good person's framework could possibly come from that. We might have some discussion about that today, or it could be that the participants just breeze right by that and have nothing to say about it. But yeah, my beliefs are fairly complicated, but at the end of the day, I do believe, largely because of human limitations, that there are times when we have to engage in war and we have to defend ourselves lethally. Furthermore, you'll see if I do much talking this show, I believe those two things are connected. And so I think it would be very strange to find someone who, say, did not believe that self-defense, lethal self-defense was okay, but they also believed that war was okay. I think these things kind of go hand in hand. So I'm gonna stop there and turn it over to Russell. Russell.
What's up, everybody? Yeah, so this is an important subject. We see throughout Christian history that, the early church favored more of a pacifistic way, although it's been debated that may not have been the case, that this topic was actually debated pretty vigorously. But yeah, so when it comes to self-defense and and war. You know, I think for me, self-defense is allowed. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a complete pacifist, because I think there is a moral obligation, duty to protect one's family. So I do believe that self-defense is a viable option for a Christian. I just, everything else that David brought up in his opening, I didn't have a write-up, so I couldn't get back to you guys. So I didn't prepare anything myself. So I do believe Christians have a right to self-defense. War, I think that I think I expressed in my opening statement 2 weeks ago what I thought on war. So you'll have to go back and re-listen to that or whatever you want on that to get my position there. But yeah, David.
All right. Trevor, would you like to say a few words and set the table about your initial thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Travis. I've been a Christian for about 4 years. I kind of grew up not believing in God. I've just recently come into the faith, so to speak. Uh, and even as a Christian, I've kind of my view has differed on this because I have a part of my family who's Messianic Jewish, and so they would very much defend like what's kind of known as just war, and like you were saying, the God of the Old Testament being vengeful, and that what was good for Israel can kind of, ancient Israel can kind of still be good for today. And so that's kind of the view I just like automatically adopted. But really looking at it, I have had a change of heart and I lean much more pacifist now. I think the only time that it's justified to kill is if one's life is in immediate danger. Or I would also apply that nationally. Like if we're like going to be like under attack for sure, then yes, it's okay to defend our country nationally and everything. But I think a lot of the killing, even what we call justified killing that happens, is unjustified. I think of like police procedures. I think there's other things they could do that would spare a lot of lives. I'm very anti-death penalty, and so I think there are these instances where it is justified, but I would lean very much pacifist otherwise. So that's what I got, and we can kind of flesh that
Sure.
out a little bit
I
more.
appreciate that, and I hope you show up tomorrow, same time, because we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about the death penalty exclusively tomorrow. It was going to be a part of today's show, but one of the people that I really wanted on it couldn't be here today, and so we'll do a
Okay.
smaller show tomorrow on that. So I think it would be interesting to have some multiple views on the death penalty, because I think we'll find that
Yeah.
that's not a partisan issue at all. It's not going to break down by Christian versus atheist, and I think that we're gonna have a very interesting discussion on that. Andrew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, so I'll rather than talking about whether I'm a pacifist or not, I will simply ask a practical question. This is something that is in the news right now. Directed energy weapons. In the last few days, there was a directed energy weapon attack on someone that worked for the National Security Council, if I'm not mistaken, in Washington, D.C. If you want a little more background on this, you can look up Havana syndrome. We've been concerned about directed energy weapons since 2016. We've had probable incidents of directed energy weapon attacks against U.S. diplomats in Havana, Russia, and China. And so my question is one sheerly of practical nature. If someone is using directed energy weapons, even though it's hard to trace on U.S. soil, is that an act of war? If they attack our diplomats in a foreign country, Havana, Cuba, or in Russia, or in China, are those acts of war? And what degree of probability do we require if these things are acts of war? What degree of probability do we require in order to declare some kind of response against these attacks that are very hard to pin down. So I'll go back on mute. That's my question for the room, and I look forward to the show.
Okay. So yeah, so we'll come back to that very briefly, but I want to do something for this show that I didn't do with the abortion show. I want to see if we can't set the table with regard to the framework that we use for coming up with decisions about our opinion. So for me, it's a little bit difficult because I can easily tell you what I'm not using. I'm not using a Christian framework. So that's clear. And I'm not necessarily using a humanist framework either. I have given people permission to call me a humanist if you have to call me something, but I don't really I'm not really a good humanist either if that's what I have to be. I don't have a worldview. And I know that there are some Christians who think, oh no, everyone has a worldview. Well, it's just not true, and I don't have one. And so there's no named framework that I can hang on this to say this is what I use, therefore, to come up with my opinions about this thing. But to the extent that this is a framework at all, my view is based on bringing the most good to the most people with the least amount of suffering possible. Now, that's very complicated to unpack, and I recognize that. And I will unpack it as we go. We'll see how the conversation goes, but that's kind of my starting point with this. Now, Travis, you have you're going to land on some different conclusions, I think, than I will. So, would you mind talking about your starting point, your framework that you'll be using for this discussion?
Sure. My framework is as in it's kind of exactly like you said. Like this, my view has shifted due to my Christianity. Okay, and so I look at we do have things like war in the Old Testament, but with the the advent and the work of Christ, I think we see a very much a paradigm shift, and so I'm gonna frame it based on things like in the Sermon on the Mount. And the fact that we're told in the New Testament to not to resist the governing authorities and to be subjected to them. I mean, when I look at what the early church went through under the tyranny of the Roman Empire, and if they had these conclusions, then I want to project that same mindset that the first Christians, the early church had, who were even subjected to the Roman Empire, and I think we have it far better than that today. And so that's going to be the framework. I'll try my best to, kind of convert here to what's going on with us.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And before moving on to the others, I just want to put this earworm out there for you, and you can come back and address it, at another time or right now if you like. But since you're framing it largely with the New Testament Christianity, isn't it possible that some of the more pacifist tone that we get was practical rather than doctrinal? Because Christians were people without a country. They really weren't good Jews. They weren't good Romans. Right. They were people without a country, people without a flag, people without an army. And so, yes, I can certainly see how a more pacifistic approach would rise up with a religion that starts with that framework. However, if you're right. Ancient Jews and you've got a holy land to defend and you've got an army, you're going to have a different approach. And if you're Rome, you rule the world. Of course, you have armies and things to defend. But if you're Christians, you just don't have any of that.
Right. Yeah, you definitely bring up some good points. And what's interesting is a lot of that was by choice. Like I know when Christianity first like really got off the ground, like we go back to like let's say the book of Acts, the early Christians were very much Jewish. I think it wasn't until like we see writings like the Didache and everything, they kind of by choice started separating themselves from their Jewish, from their country. And what's interesting is at that time, Israel and Rome were very much at odds. You think of what happened in 70 AD. And, with the early church, there were also a lot of like Greco-Roman converts too that kind of separated and kind of joined this Christian movement. So a lot of this separation and being a people without a flag, it was by choice because I think they saw the teachings of Christ as being more so influential in their lives that was their first. I don't know what the right word. Their dedication was more with that than with their country.
Okay.
Or
Russell,
what was going on with them?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I didn't mean to cut you off. Russell, tell us a little bit about your foundational framework for coming to these decisions, and if it differs at all from Travis's, clue us in on the differences.
I don't think it does differ that much. He might be a little more to the right of pacifism than me. But I gave you a pretty specific opening statement the other week that pretty much laid out my points here. And that was basically in the frame of reference to self-defense. I don't believe that killing should be the mindset. Even if you're using lethal force, you're not thinking, I'm going to kill this person. Your mindset should be, I'm going to stop this threat, and if they die in the process, that's unfortunate and that's terrible. But I can't allow this person to be a danger to my family, my friends, and if they're, looking to do us harm, they have to be stopped. So that's kind of like my framework when lethal force is necessary, and that's the same you have to take to the courtroom. So yeah. So as far as it relates to Christianity, like I said in my opening statement last week, I do believe that we have to participate in this world. I think that's what Jesus was saying. Yeah, we represent him, but we also have to render to Caesar's what is Caesar's as well. So if our government, for example, asks us to fight a war or drafts us in a war, for the Christian, depends what he believes about the war, if it's totally a defensive war and he's just in that defense. But that's not the nature of militaries, and I understand that. And the nature of fighting, a lot of times it's all offensive. So I think at times Christians would be just to be conscientious objectors, so to serve in that way. However, yeah, well, not however, but that's kind of like where I go with all that. So yeah, it is largely based off of my understanding of the Sermon on the Mount, the New Testament. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andrew, um, I don't, I, we talk a lot about this, but we don't talk about the underlying frameworks of your thought process. So I've explained mine a little bit. People just assume that, all atheists are alike, and we're not. And that's shouldn't be assumed any more than assuming that all Christians are alike, because they're not. So I want to give you a chance to answer this question, but I also, knowing that you've studied some of this, would like to know your thoughts on uh, early Christian pacifism. Do you at all believe, also, chat room, I'm not sure if you've dealt with this or not, but do you believe that the early Christian stance on pacifism was largely doctrinal or practical? Because it seems to me that when the church, in scare quotes, got power, they also got militant. So it seems like when their practicality changed, their doctrine changed. So anyway, I don't. You can respond to all that. You are on mute.
And he continues to be on
Okay,
mute.
you were still on mute. Okay, that's fine.
You know, he's old, so he passes out sometimes. You know, it's that
be.
narcolepsy that comes on, you know, and he just, you know, it's
Yeah.
okay. We understand.
That's fine. I was really kind of looking forward to that response too. So that's fine. I actually don't know enough of church history to speak to that well. I do know that it was hotly debated among the church fathers, but it seems to me that it's a very practical kind of thing. When churches were born in during times when they had national identity, they were militant, and then when they didn't have a national identity and a military and a flag, they were pacifists. And the Christian experiment is just a very interesting one because it was born during a time when it would have and should have been and was pacifist. But as soon as it had the ability to become something more or something other than, it did it. So
Well, David, let me give a little pushback on that because, okay, and you know, I studied this a long time ago, so
Okay.
I'm going off of memory here. Years ago, I was looking at a story about a legion. It was a group of Christians within a specific legion when Domitian started commanding worship of himself, and these guys were Christian soldiers for Rome. And when Domitian had that edict come down, they decided, hey, we can't do that. And they were marched out on a frozen lake and told to strip, and they ended up dying of hypothermia. However, what I see in the Christian history is, yes, I agree with you. This was hotly debated. Absolutely. The church fathers debated it, and I think even some changed positions here and there on it when it comes to pacifism and defense. Scripturally, I see that disciples did carry swords at times. You could also say, well, that was a minach, and minach is a utensil that was not only a knife that was used for defense, but also a tool that was used for everything. So how do we make sense of it? We did see Peter strike off the ear of that dude. So there's obviously this sort of mentality was present. And Jesus basically said, hey, those that live by the sword die by the sword, and put the dude's ear back on. So you have that. Then you also have nowhere in the scripture where a soldier converts like Cornelius or the two guys that John the Baptist baptized. You don't see them saying, hey, you got to stop being a soldier. You know, be happy with your wages. I mean, that's what John the Baptist said. Be happy with what you got and do it well. You know, do right, you know. So yeah, and I really wish I had this article that I brought up because it was a pacifist, right? She had wrote a church. She was a Mennonite, one of Titus's people. And she wrote up an article where she outlined all this stuff, and I don't have it with me, obviously, because I didn't know exactly what we were doing today because you didn't give me a write-up. But yeah, it's all your fault, David.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine. And I think there's some good points there.
Yeah.
Especially the point about whether soldiers, this is a thing that we used to debate when I was in church and very young, whether soldiers who converted needed to stop being soldiers. And we had concluded that we didn't see any evidence of that either. But Travis, I want to turn it over to you.
Sure.
How is that possible? You know, if pacifism is the correct stance, how do you continue being a soldier and a pacifist?
So now the first part about, you know, the the Roman like centurions and everything that became Christians and stayed in the military, all I can do is speculate. Because I mean, we really don't know too much. I mean, as far as written records go, but I would assume that it would be dependent on what you're commanded to do. That your first allegiance would be with Christ. And also, there's the thing, so I was thinking about what you said about it being practical at the time, and it was very much inconvenient. I mean, the first Christians who decided to step away from, like, even Israel. Okay, they didn't, when they stepped away from their Jewish culture, when that they started like progressing away from that, they lost a lot of protection they would have otherwise had, and they faced horrible, I mean, horrible martyrdoms and suffering for what they believed to be the teaching of Christ. And so I don't really see it as being very practical in that sense. Now there is, a couple of hundred years later, when Rome, like, really, when they finally converted to Christianity, then we start seeing it become more militant. So there's that aspect to it. I would just try to model, in my view, what the first, like, the disciples and the followers of the disciples, that very early church, and look at the martyrdom they faced, the suffering they faced on behalf of Christ, and try and represent that particular view.
So one of the questions
If
I
that makes
had,
any sense.
yeah, no, that makes sense. But so let me just throw this out there. This is actually at the end of my list, but
Okay.
I want to promote it right now. Do you believe that Jesus would have ever used lethal force against an attacker, whether it's military or in his personal life? And if not lethal force, how about just violence? Would he punch someone in the face to save
Well,
himself or his mother, or what do we see with Jesus? Because I've always seen in the Jesus character
right.
someone who would never lift a finger to harm another, even if that other was set to harm him. I saw Jesus as an extreme pacifist, even though I was not an extreme pacifist
Right.
as a Christian.
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of, like, things with, like, well, the hypostatic union. He's God and man simultaneously, and like he could, like, he could prevent an attacker in a number of ways when it comes to that. But I also think of times when, like, he drove out there were money changers out in front of the temple, and he was really offended by that, like, because he thought of it as, like, merchandising the house of God and everything. And we see him drive people out with a whip, kick over tables, and things like that. I don't think he would have ever used lethal force. I think he would definitely do some form of restraint had it come to that.
Okay,
And
well,
had,
explain the whip, because the whip was it's pretty violent.
Okay.
Was he just scaring them with the whip, or was he actually ripping flesh off with a cat of nine tails? What was he doing?
Okay.
Well, the whip,
No,
the whip,
I don't think.
yeah, the whip described in the New Testament in John, and how they made it and stuff, was more like a sheep whip. So the
A crop?
pacifist is always, yeah, something like that. They make it very clear that that was Jesus' intent, was that whip was actually for the animals, more or less, not for the people. But no, I know a lot of
Interesting. I've
people
never
get,
heard that.
so I get man, when I studied this, because I was talking to Titus a lot about it, and so I mean, that was one of the things they brought up. I looked into it, and sure enough, it was correct. Not whether he didn't use it on the people or not, I have no idea. I think we can only speculate about that. But as far as the type of whip, it wasn't some bull whip we think about, like Indiana Jones had, or something like that, or cat of nine tails with shredding claws on them and pieces of metal and bronze hooked to them.
So I'm gonna do you a favor. I'm not going to actually go to the scripture text and see, but I've never read it that way. I've always read it as Jesus taking a whip and using it against the people to drive them out. He drove the people out
he
of the
drove
temple.
he
But
drove them and the animals out, both of them. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah,
I looked it up too because I had the same premonition as you, David, when
Mm.
I first started looking into this, and there were things I had to adjust on it. So, but I think that's should happen to anybody that learns something new, you know. But
Okay. Well,
but what's
I'll be
interesting,
open to that.
David?
right.
Yeah.
And
Well, what's
Go. Well,
interesting,
hang on,
David?
Travis.
Okay, go ahead, Travis.
Travis trying to get in.
Go ahead,
oh
Travis.
yeah, I was just gonna say like it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't actually mention him striking the people. And I don't think he would strike them like to like cause them bodily pain or injury. But I think it was a form of chastisement, and we see it's actually connected to a verse in the Old Testament that my house will be called a house of prayer, or some. I'll have to look at the exact verse, but he's actually getting that from an Old Testament verse,
Right.
and so it might be good to kind of look in the context of that. But yeah, I think it's more just like chasing them away, like the threat of getting hit with a whip. I could even see something like that, and that drove them away.
Okay.
That's
Well,
just one
I
of my
think
thoughts.
if he's threatening them with the whip, I'm not sure that I can separate that from actually whipping them, because you're using violence either way. I mean, if the people
No,
are not afraid that immediate violence is going to be visited on them, they wouldn't have been threatened enough to leave.
I don't know. I mean, if I see somebody like really angry, kicking over stuff, driving stuff out with a whip, I'm probably gonna just like leave myself.
Right, because you think
So
that something
I can
bad
totally
might
see
happen
that.
to you, but presumably
It's
there are
because
more of
Travis
them.
is a big baby and he's scared of everything.
Well, I mean, there are more of
Nah,
them
he's a
than
Texan.
there are. Yeah, well, I mean, a pacifist Texan. That I don't buy it.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah,
Oh,
I
y'all are
see
killing
that
me.
is whether Jesus hit them with the whip or not, he's using a threat of violence in a way that they found credible enough to skidoo. So I don't, but
But
that
I mean,
incident aside, and I'm not honestly not sure if I credit that incident as actually historical. I don't, I never did see Jesus as the kind of guy where if we transported him to our time, that he would have a gun under his pillow to protect his family.
no, I don't think so either.
Absolutely. But David, I mean, you spend so much time with us and this. I mean, what about your views here? I mean, uh, can you maybe rephrase the question for yourself as well, and give everybody else because you said you don't have a worldview, which I don't buy. I mean, you do have a time where I think it's time to stand up for something. So kind of like rephrase the questions
No,
and,
I don't have a
us
worldview.
give us
So,
give us something from your side too, because I mean you're only hearing from us, and this is going to be make for a boring show if that's the case.
well, it's not my fault that your beliefs are boring, and at
Ooh,
times inconsistent. But
Well, at
I
least they're not always inconsistent like you.
well,
shots fired.
At least we have a worldview. You don't have
oh,
anything.
oh,
So how
Travis,
can we trust you saying
these
for
are not
anything?
even shots. These are handshakes before the shots. Um, yeah, I don't mind going into it a little bit more. As I said, I think it's always more complicated, and you have to work a lot harder when discussing a moral issue when you don't have a worldview. I kind of find worldviews lazy because it becomes a shorthand, and then you can just kind of look in your worldview dictionary. Well, okay, well, whatever my worldview says I'm supposed to think about this, that's what I think. I don't have one of those. I don't have a worldview dictionary. I have to figure it out as I go, and I have to use some basic overarching principles, which I have talked about some, and I will continue to talk about because you want me to, which is the greatest possible good for the greatest number of people with the least amount of suffering visited onto people. So, how does that cash out in a situation of, well, first of all, let's start with war. I said from the outset, I don't like war, and I do appreciate pacifists. I'm not a pacifist. I've never been a pacifist, But I appreciate that position a lot more than I ever have before. But I do think that, when there is a tin pot dictator who has charge over the lives of hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and they are visiting the greatest possible suffering on the greatest possible of number of people within their reach, then it behooves us to stop it. Uh, I think that is the essence of moral responsibility. Um, so, what can I name a situation like that? Not off the top of my head, but if I had to go back in history and name a situation where I think we should have stepped in, it would have been when Hitler was roasting Jews. That's not actually what pulled us in. I think the church, with all of its military influence, should have stepped in. The church was okay with it because the church was very anti-Semitic at the time. So I think that was a time when the moral thing did not push us, and I think that we went into the war for more practical reasons because what if Hitler gains more power in this place or that, and then he might be unstoppable, and then he's coming for us. Sure, that's a calculation. I don't think it's a particularly moral calculation. I think that at that point, it's just I see a place where this is going to hurt me personally, and so I should step in. But I think that we have a responsibility to step in when we see someone exerting undue control over a people and causing the greatest amount of misery possible. I do not, for instance, believe in national autonomy or sovereignty. So this was one of the questions in my notes, and so it just will come up now. I think that sovereignty is a bit of a cop-out. I don't think that nations have it. I don't think that individuals have it. We are individuals all sharing the same planet. And so we have some autonomy and sovereignty to a limit. But that limit is indeed finite. And at some point, when someone is doing something that is harmful to greater society has to stand up and stop that person from doing it. And no amount of personal sovereignty or autonomy can justify not stopping the person.
Right. So I guess I'll step in. One thing I would kind of clarify is while I am a pacifist, I do think we have these moral obligations, like you were saying. The thing with Hitler, we can kind of get into the history of that. And yeah, sadly, a lot of that had to do with the teachings of Martin Luther, and it kind of promoted sort of an anti-Semitic view within the church. So I would definitely critique some of the church in that too. But I guess my thing would be, it would kind of come down to military practices, like how we go about doing this. Can we do it in the least lethal form possible to preserve the most amount of life possible? So
I completely agree with
kind
that.
of just some, yeah.
Yeah, that I think that when you're talking about applying force, what you want to do, if it's possible to measure this, sometimes we can't measure it, but if it's possible to do, we need to apply the least amount of force to bring about the desired result, not the greatest amount of force. You don't kill a bug with an atom bomb. That's not a good use of force. In fact, you don't kill a bug with a hammer. So you swat a fly with a fly swatter. That seems like the right amount of force. And so you have to, there are times when it's not a bug. Maybe it's a rabid dog that's terrorizing the neighborhood. Maybe you need a hammer or a BB gun or something. If it's a bear, you need more than a hammer. You need something else. And so you have to measure your response so that you do the least amount of harm to innocent people. You bring the most relief possible, the least amount of suffering possible. That's a difficult calculus, and I'm perfectly okay with disagreeing with people on where that calculus is, as long as we're all striving for the same calculus.
right?
Yeah,
And
I hold on, Travis. Let me jump in real quick. Yeah, I would agree. And just to piggyback off that point, David, is that's how we're trained in my profession, is that we have to use the least amount of force possible to stop a threat or to contain somebody or to do anything, at least amount of force. We do have a continuum that we measure it by. And sometimes it's blurred. Sometimes the line is drawn where, is this too much? Even for example, one of the softer forms of physical force is OC spray, right? However, that stuff's really painful, man. And that could also be used on the continuum as hard physical force, malicious wounding. But on the same is the taser and the baton, right? A baton can kill somebody, and
or a knee.
blow up a knee, and cause permanent damage. And so can the taser gives people heart attacks. We've seen that now. So I mean, there's several things that you have to do, but yes, least amount of force possible. And even when the threat is stopped, like if you shoot somebody 2 times in the chest, that ends the threat. They drop their weapon, they're on the ground hurting. You have to render aid. That's part of our job. We have to render first aid to them. So secure the weapon or whatever they're using and perform first aid. And I think that's a measured response.
Yeah, I think the same thing is true in war. When you've won the war, the first thing you should do is render aid to the people who suffered from the war.
Absolutely.
You secure the territory, and then you render humanitarian aid.
Yeah. And it's so funny because there's such a line with this, and even Andrew brought this up in his question, which I think directed. I don't know enough about directed energy weapons. I don't know enough about them, but if once all that's put on the table, and if that's viable, then yeah, I mean, it can be an act of war if it's perpetrated in that intention, and it does hurt people and so forth. So I think there can be that line drawn once we have an idea of what that is, what directed energy weapon is. I mean, I do know of one scenario, like when Cisco decided he was going to bombard that one planet with that special photon torpedo. Those are directed energy weapons, and he ended up killing the entire atmosphere, and taking it out. So I mean, but
You're thinking Deep Space Nine. And,
I am thinking Deep Space Nine.
And
Yeah.
the last time we saw Commander Eddington,
Yeah,
excellent episode, by the way.
it was a great episode.
Yeah, I think Cisco went too far.
Yeah, he did go too far. But you also brought this up though, like with using the atomic weapon on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example. Did we have to drop that second bomb? I don't think so. I think we should have gave them a little bit more time. But did we have to drop that first bomb? I've heard really good arguments on both sides, and I'm just
Me too.
yeah. So I mean, it's just I don't know. Could have a island hopping war caused a lot more death and destruction? I mean, I wasn't at Okinawa. I don't know. So I know it was bad.
What I understand from it is that the emperor, the leader of the forces, was willing to destroy all of his people to continue the war, and there was never going to be a point where he surrendered, and so it took something that awful to make him stop. Now, I don't know if that's true. I wasn't there. Even if it's true, is it the least amount of harm to continue to fight a slow war where everybody dies? I don't know. That the answer to that question is beyond my pay grade. I have knee-jerk reactions in both directions there. But I would just have to say that if I was there and if I were on the council there making that kind of decision, it would be based on the same thing that I have outlined, which is to stop an evil with the to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people and deliver the least amount of harm possible. And so I don't, like so many people, I don't condemn the bomb being used because I believe that the people who used it were in that calculus. And whether they got it wrong or not is for history to decide. But I think that if they got it wrong, they got it wrong for the right reasons.
Right, right. And there is something you said earlier too about uh Hitler and so forth. And there were people that did the assassination attempts that were part of the church. I mean, the Lutheran Dietrich Bonhoeffer was killed for his role in Valkyrie. So I don't I think there were steps to be taken. I don't know if I may have understood your entire point there, but I do see where people actually stepped in to try to stop that man.
Well, the church at large, and when I say the church, the Catholic Church in particular, they did have. I've lost my. Okay, there we go. They did have some ability to influence the world, to fight that, to engage in what they would have considered a holy war. And whereas I'm not a believer in holy wars, if you're going to have one at all, that would have been a good time for it.
I agree.
So yeah, war, it's a terrible thing, but once again, I think it's a necessary thing, and this is why I can't get on board with pacifism, because pacifism suggests there's never a time when this remedy is appropriate. Travis, speak to that a little bit, because you identify somewhat as a pacifist.
Yeah, so I think it should be avoided at any and all costs. Well, I don't want to say any, but at all reasonable, much more reasonable than we would even take it now, costs. And I can't help but think there's like a lot of reform that we could do. Like I don't agree with a lot of these things. We like, for example, could we put some type of like highly potent tranquilizer darts in place of bullets? I don't, even locally, I think law enforcement takes when they use force, they will use the deadliest amount of force possible. And it's the same thing with our military. And so I would say we're justified in going to war if it's a matter of life or death, national security, like the North Koreans are going to take over America if we don't do anything. In those cases, I think it is, but I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of steps we could do to preserve the most amount of life possible.
Well, what if it's the North Koreans are going to take over the South Koreans and America's not directly involved? Shouldn't we still get involved because we can?
I think we should. I think we should pursue peace talks at all costs. If if they're just not hearing it and they're going to war, I think it is morally justified to step in. But again, with even less force than we would use protecting our own country. I just I recognize that there are times when we need to step up, and I think we're under moral obligation, even as Christians, like we have this moral obligation to serve God and do what's morally right. But I think we should do it in the least harmful way, and I don't think we're doing that.
Okay, let's transition from war a little bit. By the way, Brian with an I in the chat, I see your quote from Justin Martyr. Would you be so kind sometime today or tomorrow to post that on the board, particularly after the show has been out? So that I think that's very useful in providing some perspective. Those of you who are listening to the show who are wondering what I'm talking about, you'll see. All right, so let's transition to self-defense here. And this may be redundant, but I feel exactly the same way about self-defense as I do with war. It's not a thing that I want to do. It's not a thing that I look forward to doing. But it's a thing that I'm prepared to do. And I think that a lot of people are prepared to do it. This is why people take martial arts classes. Because they're preparing themselves against the eventuality that they have to do violence to another human being. that's the whole point of martial arts class. You can think of it as good exercise and dance. It's a way of training yourself to be able to do violence, and if necessary, the violence against another human being. We it's legal to buy guns in this country. I rather wish it was not. But one of the main reasons people say they need to own a gun is so that they can be prepared to deal lethal violence against an attacker. So I think we have an overwhelming sense in the U.S. I'm curious to see how some of our European hosts think about this. Maybe I'll get some of that tomorrow. But we seem to have an overwhelming understanding that it is okay to use lethal force to protect yourself. So let's just take a brief poll among the panelists. I think it's okay to use lethal force to protect yourself. But the reason I think that, and please provide your reason when you give the answer, the reason I think that is probably somewhat monstrous. It's going to be hard for some people to hear, but I will just be perfectly honest. I think it is okay for me to protect myself because I am the most important person in the world to me. My life is valuable to me. It does not have to be valuable to anyone else, but it is the most valuable thing to me, and I will protect it that way. And then the wife of my tribe, the wife of my tribe, the life of my tribe, however I define my tribe, my immediate family, and my parents, my extended family, whatever my tribe is, my friends, those lives are extremely important to me, and they are way more important to me than the life of any attacker. So in the grand value of human lives, the highest value to me is the lives of me and my tribe, and I would do anything to protect it. So, Russell, your thoughts on self-defense? Obviously, considering what you do, you wouldn't do what you do if you didn't believe that self-defense was okay. And you, I imagine, are also someone who knows how to deal lethal force when needed. Tell me about your thought, though, and what you base that decision on.
Well, I do think that self-defense is a viable option for Christians. Again, I laid this out, I think, earlier with my whole, when it's appropriate to use lethal force is justifiable when you feel like your life is in danger, that of your family. I don't think there are people that go way out of bounds and they look for fights, but I do have a concealed weapons permit. I do carry every once in a while.
Are you packing right now?
No, I'm in my house.
I mean, I'm just
absolutely not. Guys, I gotta admit, man, I love going to the range. I love shooting. I love shooting different type of guns. I mean, it's definitely fun. I have to qualify 4 times a year to be able to carry on my job. So there is.
I used to have a BB gun. I love to target practice.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
And there's definitely, like I said, there's definitely a huge issue when it comes to this, and that is, as in this field, you have to know what's beyond your target. Okay. We just got, I just went through a recertification training. I told you I've been slammed this month with recertification trainings. It's even bleeding over into next month because the company can't get their act right. But that only comes to life-saving stuff, like CPR and so forth. But anyways, knowing what's beyond your target, because you can hurt somebody. That bullet can easily go past and strike an innocent bystander, and it happens. So mindfulness, we go through training, certain trainings where we have 3 targets flip, and one of them's holding a gun and 2 are not. and you have to be able to quickly decide who you're going after. I mean, and you have to know what's beyond that target, you know, and sometimes behind it at the 25-yard line is an innocent person. So, you know, it's just, you know, there's so many different areas that you have to be trained in when it comes to this. And when it comes to what I believe in this is yes, I take the biblical view of self-defense on the aspect of, you know, human life is valuable. There are some scriptures that I think you could look into and say, okay, well, Jesus was talking about this versus that. I think like the one where you turn the other cheek, I think that was obviously a step to pride and disrespect and a challenge of you know, so on. But yeah, I think that when it comes to somebody doing you seriously bodily harm, it's not uh uh and it could be vague, Brian P. I mean, you know, it could be vague. I don't know for sure, because you know, I didn't get a chance to really look into it. But as far as I'm concerned, I think there is a justification of using force, and that it can get to a lethal point.
So
Is
Travis,
that good?
yeah, Travis, what do you think and why? And a question from the peanut gallery: is there one biblical view on this? Are there multiple biblical views uh, on this? How does one kind of come to a quote unquote biblical view on lethal force and self defense?
Okay, so I'll kind of start with my view and then go to the what I think is biblical. And this is an interesting question because I did, especially before I became a Christian, I got a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I'm really passionate about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And so there are ways of
You look like
restraining.
you're built for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, actually. I bet that you're a very fierce competitor there.
But I mean, so there are things you can do, like let's say, like a Kimura arm lock or a guillotine choke to like restrain somebody without hurting them. So I don't think we should cause any undue pain or anything of that sort on even like attack people who are in the wrong. Okay, we shouldn't cause anything undue. I think the only time it should come to violence or life and death is if you or like a loved one are in immediate physical danger. Then I think it's okay to use forms of restraint, the least amount possible, but yes, to restrain. And deadly force would only be if you're in imminent physical danger of dying or a loved one is dying from this attacker. I think that's the only circumstance in which it would, like, I don't think even somebody breaking into your house, I think we should try and, if at all possible, restrain them. I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, and there may be good reason to
Yeah,
disagree on that particular one. So
that would be
that's a
me.
little that is a little controversial, but yeah. So with the biblical view, I kind of take things like you know again with the Sermon on the Mount. I think we have an obligation to love, like even those who would persecute us and everything. And I don't think that there's one specific view on what to do if someone's like physically attacking you. Maybe Russell can chime in on that biblically. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure.
I can tell you, I don't love people who are persecuting me or who are maliciously using me or who are tarnishing my good name or causing me harm. I actually think that's kind of bad advice. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't take any of my views about self-defense from the Sermon on the Mount. Um, I do take them once again, trying to apply my principle as much as I can, and I can't say that it's always consistent. But if someone is trying to kill me, in this instance, I'm innocent and they are not. And innocent life is always going to be more valuable to me than guilty life. If they're trying to kill someone that I care about as much as I care about myself, that person's life is going to be more valuable than the person who's trying to take their life. And so we're kind of looking at this in a framework of, well, what if they're coming after me? And I guess the term self defense kind of evokes that idea. But I think a more interesting idea is, what about just defense of the other? So if someone walks into a school with a gun to shoot up some kids, uh, is it okay to kill them? Are you going to have a conversation with them?
I
They've maybe shot 3 kids already, and
I
they're looking
think
for the gym. What is that okay? Can we put that person down for good?
I think
yes.
again, David.
I think.
Okay, go ahead, Travis.
Oh no, I was going to say briefly that I don't take pacifism to such a strong degree that, oh, we should just pray for him and love him anyway. Like if somebody's shooting, no, I think we have a moral obligation to stop somebody like that at any and all cost. And I think at that point, uh, non-lethal non-violence thing is off the table, and that needs to be stopped at all costs. So I would not take pacifism that far.
Okay, Russell.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, we have moral obligations to protect them children. That's where I would stand easily.
Okay. Um, we're having way too much agreement, so let me see if I can throw in a homemade, what do you call it, an IDE, an improvised some kind of improvised explosive device. I want to throw one of those in there. Because Travis, you kind of brought this up yourself. You're saying
Okay.
If a person breaks into your home,
Mhm.
that's not enough. Now I understand that perspective.
Mhm.
So don't get me wrong. Yeah,
I
I
can
think as a
nuance
talking
it too.
point, yeah, no, as a talking point, I do get it. But I have person or people, depending on when it is, that I'm responsible for.
Sure.
And if someone breaks in my home,
Mhm.
I'm not going to negotiate. I'm not going to have a conversation to see if I can get them to just steal the TV. But
Right.
please don't hurt anybody. If they are in my home, they are dead if I can make them dead, because I don't know what they are going to do. Maybe they will just steal the TV and leave, but maybe they come in and they kill everybody first, uh, so they can take their time and get more than TV. I have no idea. When maybe they thought the house was empty. When they see someone is here, they're going to shoot people. I don't know, and I don't have time to ascertain what they're going to do.
Right.
And so this is the kind of situation where a person has forfeited, and I do believe this as a part of my overarching principle. You can forfeit your life.
Mhm.
There are things that you can do to take your life out of its protected state. If you step in front of a train, you have forfeited your life. It is not the train's fault that you are dead. It's on a track. Okay, you actually have to go where the train is to get hit by a train. It cannot swerve into you. So you have forfeited your life. If you rob a bank, uh, you have forfeited your life. There are lots of things that you can do to do that. If you try to put a gun up to a police officer's head while he's in a car to try to steal the police car, you have forfeited your life. You may or may not lose it in those situations, but you have given up any right to it that you once had. And so once a person has stepped into my house uninvited in a way in time where I believe that they are there to do harm or could do harm, I don't need to ask the next question. They have moved into a state of forfeiture, and I am going to do what it takes to protect myself. As the black conservative Ken Hamblin used to say, I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Okay, so my particular response, I think we should kind of look at it in context from my point of view. I think it's situational. I think if somebody breaks in and well, here in Texas, like almost everybody has a gun. And let's say somebody's breaking in to rob, to steal, and everything. Well, I can stop that person without, if I can possibly stop that person without ending their life. I think that's what I would do. Like, for instance, you could shoot somebody in the leg. You could restrain them, but it would be situational. Like, let's say
Doesn't it take an awful lot of control to, you're in the heat of the moment, your heart's
Right.
beating fast, they probably have a gun, you've got a gun, you might get one shot, you're going to try to leg them? I'm going to go for the biggest body mass possible.
Yeah, okay, so
Well,
here's how I understand it,
no.
Travis.
Okay.
Like, here's how I understand it. Unfortunately, David, I agree with you more or less. If someone comes into your house, they have already pretty much forfeited their right for autonomy, basically, in the realm of justified homicide, or I guess is what we would call it. Maybe I'm phrasing that wrong, but when they come into your house with the intent to, and people are in there, which is, that's ballsy. You're definitely got intent. And if they have the opportunity, the ability, and the intent to do harm, I think you're justified in using lethal force to defend your family and yourself. And you are right. You go for the biggest body mass. You aim small, you're going to miss small, and you have to know what's beyond your target. You could hurt somebody else, especially depending on the bullets you use. If you're using a straight grain bullets that are full metal jacket, they're going to go through your wall probably, and they're probably going to end up or through your window and end up in your neighbor's house. You have to take that into consideration. Use some hydro shock. That's not going to happen. So if someone breaks into your house and you shoot at center mass, you're most likely going to hit that target if you're good at shooting. But there's a lot of factors that have to be taken into consideration as well, as far as that is concerned. But yeah, you hit center mass and you render aid, and that's where I would be. I would stop the threat, and that could be unloading a full magazine, because stress gets to you, and then you're dealing with 17 rounds that you might be having to stop up. But your intent is never to kill them. That's what you have to keep in mind, and that's what the prosecution is even going to look at. Was this guy running away? Did you see him, and did he run away to leave your house as soon as he saw you? That will be taken into consideration, and you have to have enough wherewithal. If you have your gun or something and you have it aimed at them and they're running away, you're a private citizen, and at that point, I'm going to let them go out of that house. I'm going to let them run away. I'm not going to shoot. My life's not in danger at that point. So, Andrew, I see you have a question. I'm going to, David, is it okay that we let him in and discuss?
Yeah.
Andrew, go ahead.
So you were touching on a point there, David R., that I thought was really interesting and parallel to a question that I wanted to ask about stand your ground laws. So the conversation right now is focusing around what if the bad guy comes in your house, or maybe they're trying to carjack you, or someplace that is clearly private to you, right? And I will just say for myself that I don't think I have the capacity to easily judge in most circumstances how lethal the other person intends to be. I would like to be able to do that. Can I trust them to only steal the TV, as David said? I think that kind of foreknowledge is pretty difficult for most of us to have in the moment. But it parallels that idea of these sorts of what if I'm in Gander Mountain? What if I'm in an outdoor outfitter and somebody comes in and they're going to do harm? Now they don't have an automatic weapon or a semi-auto with some sort of a bump stock, right? So they're single shot, or maybe they've only got a knife, right? Maybe they don't have a gun. But in the United States, that seems unlikely. So what about stand your ground laws from the Christian perspective? I know what I think about them, but from the Christian perspective, do we have the obligation to retreat in a public space, or can we stand our ground? Not trying to back you into a corner, just curious what your thoughts are.
No,
And just so you know,
yeah.
Andrew and I argued about this a couple of days ago,
yeah.
and we were
So-
on very different sides.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
we
yeah,
argue all the time.
yeah. No, I mean, no, it's okay. I mean, I understand this question. I get it, man. I've seen situations where stand your ground laws can be justified to have people commit murder. There's a one situation where this guy was standing at the bottom of his ground, and these kids were just walking towards him, talking crap to him. They had no weapon, they had nothing, and this guy just mowed them down. He mowed these kids down, and he got away with it for stand your ground, because he was able to justify, hey, they were coming at me, and there were more of them than there was of me, even though I don't know how he got away with intent. I don't know who argued that. There is part of this that like you're saying, Andrew, I think you alluded to this, that you can't know people's intent all the time, right? So the law has to cover that area, and somebody can argue it good and somebody can argue it badly. And in some cases in stand your ground laws, it's argued badly. In some cases in stand your ground laws, it's argued very well, because there is obvious intent. And I think and some people can prove that better than not. And that's what the court's actually going to look at. That's what the prosecutor's actually going to look at least from what I'm told from my training. They give us case law, and they give us stuff like that we have to look over, and we're even tested on. So and they show us training videos where these events happen, and you do see people get shot and killed, and it's horrific, but they do that to teach us, so I do see issues where stand your ground laws are effective. Like if you're in Gander Mountain and somebody has a knife and they're closing in on you, it's funny because somebody can close in on a knife on you almost quicker than you can draw out your weapon. The distant gap is very, very short, and it's very, very precise. And if you have the ability to stop that person, and if you can't stop that person and they're coming at you with a knife, now they stabbed you, they have your gun. So now they can do even more damage. So where stand your ground laws would be effective in that situation, absolutely. So you have to think about all these scenarios that go on. And sometimes even these laws and so forth, they hinder a lot too. So like you have a police officer that was accused of taking his gun out too many times in situations that he shouldn't have done it. Well, it just so happens that he was hesitant when he shouldn't have been, and he paid the price. He got killed by a Vietnam vet that was in a state of delirium, that loaded a shotgun in his car right in front of him, and the guy just had his gun out. He finally drew, and he just said, stop doing it, stop doing it. He didn't want to use lethal force. He didn't use lethal force, and a gun battle ensued, and the cop was killed. And you could hear his last breaths on the radio. It was not a pleasant video. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, Andrew, but from my perspective, I do see justification for it, especially in regards to the public sphere and assisting in stopping a threat that is a viable threat. And I've also seen where it's abused.
So we're getting close to the end here, but Travis, I want to let you in on stand your ground before I give my thoughts on it. Like I said, Andrew and I, we argued about this the other day, so he knows exactly what my thoughts are.
Okay, so I kind of, I'm definitely no expert on this, so it's kind of take what I say with a grain of salt. But I resonate with a lot of what David said. In principle, I would say it's okay. Yes, it's justified, but there's so many like mitigating factors. It's so situational. And then, in the heat of the moment, you got to realize that we're human beings. So, your brain's going to get overloaded with like neuroepinephrine, dopamine. You have all these, chemicals firing off too. So I guess I would be in favor of it in principle, but it's very dependent on certain situations, and there's just a lot of factors that go into it.
So my thoughts are, it's very simple to me, but simple in a complicated kind of way. The driving principle is, has a person done something that would account to forfeiture of their life? So I don't care if they have a gun. I don't see well. Uh, they might hold something out in a threatening way in a gun-like manner, and maybe it's a pocket knife. In the heat of the moment, I may not know that, but the fact that they threatened me in that way would, for me, mean they have forfeited their life. And at that point, I have to decide what to do. And so we can talk about fight or flight. My knees are shot. I've got 5 screws holding my legs together. I cannot run. If I see the bus and I want to make it, I'm just gonna have a kind of fast, waddly walk, and then it'll leave, and I can't catch it. There's nothing I can do to catch it because I physically cannot run. I used to be a runner, so that's kind of heartbreaking to me. But in a fight or flight moment, flight's not in the cards for me. So if I try to run, my thinking is that anyone who wanted to do me harm could catch me. Anyone could catch me. So I have to do what I can do in a stationary manner. So flight's out, it's fight. Now, what was the provocation for the fight? A case was mentioned where some kids, I assume teens, came at a person. So if some teens come after me, it's maybe dark. I'm coming from the Apple store. I went and brought my laptop to Apple Care, and I fixed it. I'm trying to come home. Maybe they're going to steal my bag, but someone is threatening an ass kicking. Well, you know what? I don't want an ass kicking. I have the right not to get an ass kicking. So have they forfeited their right? Is their life worth my ass? Yeah, they have. Comparing those two together, I'm going to save my ass, and I'm going to kill them if I can, because I don't want an ass kicking. I can't run from them. And by threatening me in that manner, they have forfeited their lives. And I think that people have a real responsibility to treat their lives with a bit more care than that. And if you are someone who is treating your life as if it's something of value, you don't pit it against another life. You don't threaten people. You don't bully people. You don't take things from people. And when you have decided that that's what you're going to do with your life, then I think that the forfeiture of your life is inevitable. And I frankly hope it comes sooner rather than later, so that you can't attack someone else. Because this is the other part of the equation. If they're attacking me, and I'm not actually a very tempting target, I'm somewhat of an imposing person when I'm standing up. If they're attacking me, they're going to attack your mother. They're going to attack your daughter. They're going to attack your kid. And if I could have stopped them, but I chose not to stop them, I chose to, do something else so that they can either come after me or someone after me, because, I didn't kill them. I didn't even hurt them. I left them angry and impotent. I think you've maybe created an even worse situation. So this is something that Andrew and I would call the Inderwiggen doctrine, which is no, I'm not fighting this fight for this moment. I'm fighting this fight for every moment after it.
Yeah, David, I also hear you. Edmund Burke, I think, was the one that said that, evil can thrive when good men do nothing. And I would see that in a situation where somebody could, be hurt and are doing the harm and then going off and doing even more harm. That's definitely something that needs to be considered, and that's why cops were granted. I think it was the case of the O'Connor case, where a suspect that was armed was fleeing and was jumping over a fence, and because he was a threat to others, the officer shot him in the back, and yeah, he has that's. But as a citizen, we don't have that option. So there are different levels. There's different continuums. Or not different continuums, but there's different situations that would be justified for a peacekeeping officer versus a civilian. So yeah, I hear you. I think that somebody that could attack another person and try to do bodily harm to him, especially they're I think you have the justification to stop them, and I think you
Okay,
have an
so
obligation to stop them.
so this is a very unusual episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm bored with all the agreement. So what I'm going to do is ask everyone to come up with a closing thought. If you can throw out a non sequitur personal insult at somebody, that would make me feel more at home. I don't know. I don't know what's become of this show.
All right, I'll start off. Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to self-defense and stuff, I think it's I did want to hear Andrew before we did close up, because I know he's the one that asked this question originally. I just want to hear his follow-up with it before I start. Andrew.
Okay. So I will go ahead and make a quite controversial statement for the close. Most of the listeners know that I was born in the Southeast. I grew up in the Southeast. I continue to live in the Southeast. And I've been on the wrong side of a gun 3 times in my life. Twice they were aimed at me. Once I was holding a gun on someone else. So I'll go ahead and say, if you've got a gun in your hand, or if someone else has got a gun in their hand, there's no right side of a gun. And if you've ever been faced with holding a killing machine on someone else, and you're having to make the decision about whether to pull the trigger or not, it changes you. And if it doesn't change you, if you don't forever see a gun differently after you've had to hold someone at gunpoint, you should turn in every gun you own. It should change you. When I was before I was 25, I was the kind of guy that could say, someone breaks in my house, I'll shoot him in the head. After that incident, when I was 25, I could no longer say that. Having the ability to kill someone and being faced with it should change you. There is no right side of a gun. I'm not arguing whether we should or shouldn't have it. But I am saying for this podcast, and to everyone that can hear me, there is no right side of a gun. And I don't want to say anything else, because I want that thought to resonate until the next person speaks. I challenge you to find, whoever you are listening, I challenge you to find the right side of a gun.
All right, so back to my closing statement here. Andrew is old. That's my insult. David, you're a pirate, and it's proven.
These are just true things of which we're very proud.
But no, guys, seriously, I resonate with what Andrew said. There's not one day, there's not any day that when I arm up in the morning that I'm thinking to myself, my God, I hope I don't have to ever use this. And I have a rule that I don't touch. Once that stuff goes onto my gun belt, I don't touch it unless something really seriously pops off. So whenever you say that, guess what? When you had a boring day at work, thank God I had a boring day at work. Thank God. And every day, that's kind of my mindset. So yes, it does. Watching training videos like the ones I've seen are disturbing. And you guys have seen other videos that I'm sure in your life that cause you to pause. And there are even situations that we've been in that are not fun. So I'll leave it there. But yeah, I resonate with Andrew on that. So who's ever next? Go for it.
Travis, how would you like to round it out? You can take a couple of minutes to say anything you want to, as is our tradition. Our closing arguments are not interrupted, so you can say whatever you like.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was the best person to have like representing the pacifist view, because I'm sort of on this journey that I've started, and you know, kind of coming from more of a, you know, gung ho self defense mode. But I think when it comes to these things, I think we should take the least amount of restraint and force that will, like, you know, safely protect ourselves and others. I do think a lot of the practices are unnecessary. Like even the example David said about the police officer who shot the guy in the back, you know, because he was a threat to others. Well, granted that, I mean, but isn't there other things like let's say you know, a tranquilizer gun, if he was in range of taser, like something that could have stopped him and brought him to justice before shooting him. And like the thing with, you know, somebody breaking into your house, I think it's very much dependent. Kind of, I like a lot of what David said. Like if the person's running away, I let him go. Now, if it's pitch black, somebody's breaking in, and I have my, you know, my family's there. Sure, you can you are very much justified and obligated, I would say, to shoot. You know, and not for the leg, but to shoot if you're, you know, in that immediate threat of danger. So I'm not a full-on pacifist in that way. I guess my thing would be we should strive to take the least amount of violent approach necessary. I think we should abolish the death penalty, to be honest. I think life in prison would be is worse than the death penalty punishment wise. And I guess to close out, and a lot of people would disagree with this, but I think we should, or I should view people through the eyes of Christ, the Christ would see them. And that includes people who persecute me, who speak evil against me, who want to harm me, and everything. So my goal is to do the least amount of harm to another human being possible, and see others through the eyes of Christ.
So, Travis, I hope you can stop by tomorrow. It's a special show tomorrow because we, like I said, we couldn't have him on today, but we are talking about the death penalty tomorrow, and I'm gonna want your perspective. So I hope you can sacrifice at least some time. It's going to be at noon Eastern time, so same time as this show. If you can't, that's okay. But I'd love to hear from you. I would say to you in response, you're the kind of pacifist that gives me hope for Texas. Because I normally don't see a lot of hope for Texas, and it has been the highlight of my week to talk to you and have you talk to my audience. So thank you very much for coming along. I find it interesting that the four of us who have participated on Mike today, we're very different people. I assure you, Andrew and I are very different people. And Russell and I are very different people, and Travis and Russell are different people. You can hear it as they talk, and yet we have almost 100% agreement on all of these things that we're discussing today. I did not expect that, by the way. That's a little bit of a surprise to me. It's a pleasant surprise. It's a delightful surprise, and so in the same way that Travis gives me hope for Texas. A conversation like this gives me hope for humanity. That regardless of your worldview or no worldview, it is possible to come to sane and rational uh, negotiation when it comes to important matters of life and death. We need more of these kinds of conversations in the world, because right now I think the national conversation, the global conversation around these things is insanity. So rather than ending with some of the other things that I had to say, you can find me in the comments, Skeptics and Seekers .squarespace.com, or you can send me an email, skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. Might bring up some of the things that we didn't talk about then, but I just want to end on a very positive and hopeful note, that good things are possible when right thinking people can come together and negotiate, and we don't need a man in the sky or a unicorn or a flying spaghetti monster or any magical idea to come to solid, insane consensus over these sorts of things. And for a while, I had somewhat despaired of that. But I do this show because I want to find those moments. And so I think looking back, this is probably the show that I will say has validated the season of the show, because there are a lot of times during this season when I just wanted to just not come back the next week. I look forward to coming back the next couple of weeks. Now, the conversations will get harder. Tomorrow, by the time you hear this in the feed, both of the shows might be there, but tomorrow, the great thinker, Matthew Taylor, will be on the show, and I don't know who else will come. I think Chase Tyler will also be on the show tomorrow, and we're going to talk about the death penalty. This is a hard topic, but I don't know how it's going to go. I believe that there will be a lot of disagreement. And I'm hoping for more of that rational negotiation that we saw today. And then the following week is going to be a harder topic, euthanasia and suicide. But we have to have this conversation. It's a part of our full humanity, and it's part of our responsibility to humanity to take our big brains and contemplate and negotiate a reasonable way forward. So one other plug I want to make. Andrew hasn't announced it yet, and he's been thinking about not announcing it, so I'm going to try to force his hand. He wants to do a show on gun ownership and gun violence, and I want to take this moment to encourage him to move forward with that plan, because there's a real discussion to be had there, and I think that you can kind of begin to see some of the outlines of that. So we look forward to that show. I hope. I don't know whether I will be on it or not, but I certainly look forward to hearing it, and I'm pretty sure that his attitude about it is, if I have successfully pushed it so that it happens, I will not be able to weasel out of being on it. But that said, I just want to thank everyone, and I think we'll end there. So goodbye, everybody.